one of the most inspiring men for us in our journey
Hello.
is Satish Kumar. Probably you already know him.
Sorry, we've got a
A beautiful
okay.
book called
S- Scott. We've got some sort of background that. Anyway, look. Welcome to the Aotearoa, New Zealand and Australia segment. I'm Andre Lloyd, the International Director of Generation International, and we are the host of this event that's been put together by many different organizations around the world, and we're featuring every part of the planet at the moment. I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, a very good friend of mine, an old friend of mine, someone who has more than 40 years experience in the organic sector. He is an organic farmer. I've actually stayed on his farm north of Auckland many times. He was the head of the peak body, OANS, in New Zealand. He was on the world board of iFoam Organics International, and he's been actively involved in all segments, nationally in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and internationally. And I'd like to hand it over to you, Brendan. It's all yours if you can take yourself off mic and start speaking. Welcome.
Thank you. But first, am I the only one who can hear a lot of background noise?
No, I can hear it too. I don't know where it's coming from.
Is that better?
Can you hear that now? It should be all
I think
right.
we're away now.
Yeah.
Cool.
Problems.
I'm not sure what that was. That was rather strange. So welcome everybody. It's great to be here. I'll just get my share my screen. Just a moment. Here we are. Okay, so I'm just going to give everybody a bit of an update from New Zealand, and I'll be going for about 10-15 minutes on this, and then we can open up for some questions. Oh. Okay, here we go. To see that it's slightly different. So look, I live on an organic farm, as Andre was saying. This is my work today. We live in a temperate rainforest. So today, I just wanted to share with you, we are a certified organic farmer, and we're also with a PGS system, but we're also a certified organic exporter with BioGrow New Zealand. And our business from BioPure New Zealand is we help micro, small and medium businesses, and we take them right through to markets nationally and internationally. But we're grounded in practice. And it's a bit of a look at today. I took these photos this afternoon as I was preparing this presentation. Look, the great thing I really love about the organic community in New Zealand is I describe us as a mosaic. So a very diverse community. From very small to very large players, micro, small, medium, and large. And we are pretty unique in that we have a domestic scheme that goes right through to export to international markets. And people, whether that's kiwi fruit or dairy, we can do that with organic. So there's never a problem there. One of the things I always like to share with people is organic is not a fad or a fashion. It's become a really distinct market segment. Okay, and it's driven by a deep desire, in my experience of the work that I've done, and Andre was so nice introducing myself. It's people want to reconnect. It's not just food; it's people are wanting to connect with mind, body, and spirit. And in New Zealand, we find that the world wants what we've got as well, and people want to reconnect. And I'm going to come back to this a little bit later in the presentation. So. Organic in New Zealand is part of this global community. fastest growing multi-food sector in the world. Myself and others, and I've been doing the organic market report now for the last 10 years. These are the results. We just did it. It was launched this year. One of the important things I think I always remind people when we talk about organic is the standards and the origins of organic was a connection between the producers and the consumers and the retailers, a whole supply chain working together to form a set of rules and reasons and logic together. Still, and one of the key reasons people purchase organic is that they see it as natural, spray-free, free of residues, and also people want to purchase to protect their family's health. In New Zealand, we've got a lot of increase in people being certified, with over 54% of operations now converting to organics. 80% of Kiwis are purchasers of organic products. We've also got the domestic market is growing twice as fast as the conventional product. So if you want to take a new product into the market of New Zealand, whatever scale operation, if it's conventional, that's interesting. But if it's organic, there's twice the interest because that's what consumers and people want. Now, like Australia and New Zealand are one of the last two sort of major trade nations in the world to go organic. So we actually have in New Zealand, we're not regulated, nor is Australia. So we've been working on this originally since 2000, more seriously since 2012. And since 2018, it's been a serious consideration. This is really important. We're working very closely with Australia and the Pacific to ensure we do that. And we're now at our second reading. We're now over in our second reading, which means we're about 2/3 of the way through the process. And that's very important for us. There's unanimous support in government, and we've got a clear majority through the whole organic community that wants and needs this. Now, this is really important because this starts for us to be legitimate. Once we get the bill through Parliament, there's going to be a lot more support and funding coming our way. This is critical. Now, simultaneously, what's happening in New Zealand and around the world is we've got this wave of enthusiasm and interest towards rethinking food systems. So we have an organisation in New Zealand called Organic NZ. It's been publishing for 80 years. I believe it's the longest running consistent publication for organic in the world. It's called Organic NZ. That's our intention. We want the world organic. But we've got all these other organisations singing from our song sheet now, like Eat New Zealand, really driving local cuisine. We've got Quorum Sense, a group of people that really driving predominantly regenerative thinking, and a whole lot of research starting to explore what it means. Now, my thinking is nothing new. 80 years of literature, there's not much new being explored, but it is this wave of youthful enthusiasm which we don't want to stop at all. So there's this cultural renaissance happening at the same time. And before, you've heard Jessica Hutchings, and we work with Jessica and a range of others with Te Waka Kaiora and Hua Parakore, including Tahuri Whenua, people getting back on the ground in the field doing it. We've also got this sort of cultural renaissance around festivals, Matariki, which is the recognition of the Māori New Year. It's a celestial celebration, a kind of mid-winter festival. And of course, what we've got also, which we've been working on, is this Global Alliance for the Future for Food, is starting to explore collectively with other countries what it means to be organic and agroecology and what that means. And there's been wonderful to bring that through. Now, these relationships can all, like all relationships, they can always improve and continue to improve, but becoming really important. Okay. So, like I said, there is this whole rediscovery. I'm really excited by it. And I draw on Organic 3.0, which you can see on the screen here, which was a collective thinking globally that took place when Andre was president, and David Gould and Marcus. There's a whole group of really good people. I was part of that, critiquing, working with that. Organic has to move. We have to evolve. And one way my sort of collection of that is we have a whole lot of young love, which I call, there's this real drive, there's this young passion to relearn, reinvent organic. Now, I understand what that's like. When I was a young guy in the 1980s, I had David Holmgren and Bill Mollison give a guest lecture at a university I was at. They set me on fire, and it was a really powerful time. So this young love is full of enthusiasm, it's dynamic, it's very local, but there's no significant markets. But there's this drive and energy we can all relate to, and none of us want to put cold water on that enthusiasm. But we've also got this emergence of what I would call with a small r in regenerative corporate. It's a small r response to regenerative. There's an awakening that they can't keep doing what they're doing. The change is a bit more of a shuffle rather than any major change. And they are creating a wannabe market. There is no market, but they're trying to reinvent it for themselves. And then, of course, we have the big R, which is the organic community trying to go deeper and we start to go get serious about an established market. Globally, would be less than maybe 1 or 2% of a global market. There's a lot of work to do. We have to change. We have to get deeper. That's very exciting. And that's the period we all find ourselves in. So I just wanted to, and it was great that the last presentations are talking about change. And in that change, I want to just introduce to you some people really important in my change, in my life, who've been really important: Bob Crowder, Stuart Hill, and Haikai Tane. But I also want to acknowledge all the Indigenous people that I've spent a lot of time with in my life, particularly when I was a younger man, traveling through Asia, the Pacific, and working and learning in the field. I'm really strong on practical apply. So for people to change, you need to be able to show people what you're doing rather than just the talk. The talk and the intellectual and the government change and the regulatory change is important, but unless we can show people and demonstrate that. So I just want to acknowledge past mentors in my life and present. So one of the big importances of change is to have a really bold vision. So in 2000, I was the president of Soil and Health Association in New Zealand, and we put out a 2020 vision. And cartoons and fantasies are a fantastic way, a utopian future. You might note, for example, at the moment, most of the futures described, if you look at science fiction or future or young people, what people are reading, is quite dystopian. We've really got to paint a positive future, and that's our role and responsibility. And this is the picture. We had electric cars, we had urban farming, we had soil health, water quality, really visioning it out and being creative. If we don't have a vision, then we get confusion. We've really got to be strong in our vision and bold, got to be bold. But also, we really have to ask of the action, who is it serving, before we support or copy it. Okay, so these are some insights for change, really creating change. Of many of those mentors in my experience. This is one of the key ones also. Who are we serving before we get them behind it? Be careful what we do. But at the same time, we've also don't need to get stuck in continually measuring our extinction or monitoring our extinction. The continual publications of endless studies when we know what the situation is, and we really do need to move into act. We've also got to focus on enabling the potential of people, society, and nature. It's all about people. You're going to see, I'll be a big repetitive notion of that, so that true sustainability can emerge. We've also got to collaborate across difference. So here we are in a meeting hosted by Regenerative International. And most of these organizations all of these organizations I've worked with, and some or got into the formation of forming them, the national body of New Zealand. We've got to pick up stitches. We've got to work with people and not stand alone, continually collaborate, even across difference. We have to do that so we don't end up isolated. We're also got to be really clear that the outcomes are only as good as the people creating them. We've got to work together So that's very similar than before. But this is, often when we move into other languages, we can get a deeper meaning. Whanaungatanga, working deeper together, understand the whole. So I really want to congratulate this gathering as a global gathering, and learning how this talking across difference, enabling, being inspired, and keep going. The other key thing that we've found is it's a scientific fact we know next to nothing. So most of what remains is unknown. We have to be constantly in the unknown, not in the known. We know next to nothing. We're insignificant. We're beautiful as individuals. Our families are beautiful, but actually, the magnificence of the lot, and so we have to be constantly in awe of the unknown and be humble, but positively progressive in what we do. The most tiniest of creatures are the most beautiful and intricate and fascinating. And children often have this experience. That's why it was great. I heard Karen before bringing in younger people, but we've really got to get a multiple generational and this engagement in the splendor and awe that we have the privilege of working with and carrying on as in our leadership roles. We've also got to look after ourselves. This is something I've learned probably as I've got older in the last 10 years, is to really stay in that visionary, principled, passionate, and contextual, and not operate out of fear, and be careful in work that we're doing. So look after ourselves and protect ourselves in that way and those around us, and have good attributes of listening. The other key thing is that we don't want to see enemies. The faults we find in others are often those in ourselves. We know that as well. So in all this work that we're doing and regenerating, reviving, revitalizing, be gentle and try not to see enemies. And of course, ask for help at all times. Be paradoxical. I'm a great fan. If you need help, people love helping out. So always ask for help, find good people, and be articulate with the need that you need from them. And nearly at the end here, learn from everyone and everything at every opportunity. It was lovely listening in before to my Pacific neighbours, and just listening and understanding those needs. And I'll be catching up through the next 24 hours of everybody else's, this notion of continual learning. We're all collaborating together. Thank you very much. That's really it from me. And I've pressed stop sharing, but it didn't want to.
You're good, Brendan. You're back on screen. So
I'm back on screen. I can't see myself. Okay.
Well, I can see you, so you're looking good. Don't worry. Hopefully everybody else can see you too. So, look, you raised a few issues, and one of the things I loved is the concept of being visionary and not acting out of fear, and particularly, at the moment, we've got the endless repetition of doom and gloom. You mentioned that, and you talked about enabling solutions. What are your thoughts on how to enable solutions and be solution orientated?
Yeah, good. So I really like that. So I think we have the answers we're looking for. We're all the leaders we've been looking for. There is no other. So I think that idea of collaborating, experimenting, showing people what you're doing, being open to learning. We've got so much science and data to support us. So, going through, in fact, I'm in a process at the moment of learning, but also creating a creative process to co-design with a group of people I'm working with. We've got to actually move into a moment of design. Creatively thinking, move into that space of being creative, bold, not limiting ourselves on what we can't do, just leave all that behind for a moment and get really visionary, and do it in your own lives as much as we can. We heard last time Flores talking about, or everybody's been talking about that. We've got to be true to ourselves and live it as best we can, not to be too harsh on ourselves, and enjoy the moment. And collaboration, strong collaboration. If we don't know, I mean, anytime I ask someone for help, people are more than willing to be in behind this space. So I encourage everybody listening all throughout this to really be daring. Because I say, what's the worst that can happen? So I really encourage us to really live our lives to the fullest. Life's short. And the task at hand is urgent. So you need, if we're serious about that, then we need to be bold. And don't ask for permission. That can be a bit controversial, but I think we just need to be really clear and get on with it. Thank you.
Yeah, Brendan, I suppose we're at the side of the other end of a lifetime of activism, and I think I have to agree with you about being bold and not asking for permission at the moment and just going out and doing it. Another issue I'd just like to talk about, because Aotearoa, New Zealand, is actually unique in the planet in that it's a developed economy, a first world economy, that is still largely an agricultural economy. In most of the developed world, agriculture's sort of been relegated to a really minor part of the economy. Yet in your country, agriculture is still really important, and agricultural exports actually make a significant part of the economy. So I'm interested in how New Zealand does it, and particularly organically.
Okay, that's all very true. Okay, so we are a big exporter, but we're also big exploiters, to be really bold. And I'm very positive about organic, but I'm also can let you know our government is not a big backer of organic at the moment. So it's a real challenge for us politically. We don't really have a political champion at a political level, Andre. I think if we're talking about a systems change, we need to have people at all levels in society, and I don't mean that as a hierarchy. I mean, from a production base, all that supply chain need to be thinking organic. So we have some very big entities, a big chunk of our kiwi fruit certified organic, but overall we're less than 1% of hectarage. It all depends on what we want to measure. I think hectarage is a very good measure because that's less poison. But we've also got a very strong horticultural sector. Probably the biggest strength we have in New Zealand is with horticulture. We have, for example, green tea, certified organic green tea grown in New Zealand, sold to the world. I believe per hectare, they're over $200,000, earning over $200,000 a hectare. Very significant. Kiwi fruit is into the $150,000 a hectare, certified organic, that is. So the government is listening, but it's how we go to scale. And I think that's a great question for all of us, really. But we need political will, we need political empowerment, and there are blockages there. But largely, New Zealand is hitting a wall. There's lots of images I could show you of what we don't do well in our agricultural systems, and we heard about deforestation through the Pacific. That's happening in New Zealand. So there's this beautiful facade, and I think we just need really to work hard with all communities wanting to back this future, and yeah, make it an organic one. But we need that political will. We've lost that.
Yep. So actually, the other one which you did mention, I think is very important, I suppose, is the environmental damage that is happening as a result of, I suppose, this push for exports, and particularly in dairy in New Zealand with the use of the heavy use of nitrogen fertilizers and all the runoff into the river systems and the pollution. How do you see how, I suppose it's always a difficult thing in all our countries, but how do you see, we can change this and start regenerating these natural environments, and particularly the aquatic environments?
So we now have in New Zealand, okay, strategically, this is just strategically the way I've always worked, is organic has to be part of it. Yes, it has to be part of an answer. There's lots of organizations pointing out what's wrong. We have to provide the solution. That goes right back to your first question, Andre. Actually, I'm probably answering it better at the last question. But we really do want to be thinking quite carefully where the answer is yes. So we've got at the moment, for example, a number of organizations pointing out the water quality in New Zealand is so bad. The nitrogen loading, it's affecting people's water. And so when people say, well, what's the solution? They turn to us and we offer a solution. We've still got a long way to go. And I think this is where certified organic has really just how would I word it? Yeah, I think we've got to pull our socks up. I think the regenerative movement and a whole lot of young people have done a fantastic work of putting pressure on us and really enhancing what we do. So we need to think of new measurements of what organic is and make sure that we continue. So that regenerative organic standard is that idea of continual improving. And
Okay.
yeah, we've got a lot of work to do too.
Yeah, we certainly do. But anyway, one last question, which actually fits into it very well, from Rajan Kumar. How to identify organic fruits and vegetables?
From New Zealand, well, you've got to be certified organic. So we don't have a regulation, but we have a certified marks, and they're well recognised. The three main ones are BioGrow, Assure Quality, and Organic Farm NZ, and we also have some Demeter.
And what about globally, around the world, from your experience?
Well, okay. From a global perspective, you really do need to be looking for that certified organic mark and national marks. And this is what Australia and New Zealand are busy doing to ensure as a national standard, national accreditation for that. We'll get there.
Yeah, you're right. We'll get there, but we're getting there very slowly.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, great, Andre.
Brendan, thanks so much. Really appreciate what you said. And now 7 o'clock we'll go to it. Thank you, Brendan.
Yeah, bye-bye.
And you're welcome. You don't have to say goodbye if you don't want. You're welcome to stay on.
Oh, no, I'll be staying on a little bit, and I'll be coming back in tomorrow.
Okay, we'll see you then. Hasta mañana, mi amigo. Have a good one.
Ka kite anō.
Okay, now it's my turn. Now we're going to Australia, and guess what? That's where I live. So I'll introduce myself as the International Director of Regeneration International and a long-term organic farmer. And previously, I was the president of IFOAM Organics International. And I want to talk about something that's very important for World Food Day. And how do we nourish the world? This is a big issue, considering the hundreds of millions of people who are food insecure. Let's see. I'm trying to find my screen. I'll just start again and see what happens. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen now. And my presentation is about local regenerative biodiverse organic agriculture systems can nourish the world. But it doesn't want to. Just let me Okay, let's try this. No, it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Okay. I think, okay. I've worked out what I have to do now, the joys of the technology. So what I want to speak about is the whole issue of how we nourish the world, food security. And if you look at the first graph, you'll see that, and this is from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, you'll see that from the 60s to 1995, the food insecurity was decreasing. Less and less people were being insecure. Then in 1995 something happened, and food insecurity started increasing. The bottom graph, if you have a look, it's the same thing again. You can actually see that the numbers of people are increasing who are food insecure. And I particularly want you to look at Africa. And what happened was in the 1990s, we saw a big change in industrial agriculture where you saw a system that was based on GMOs, synthetic pesticides, and fertilizers to supply distant commodity markets. In other words, these systems aren't about growing food. They're about supplying commodities. The best example of how industrial agriculture has failed has been the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. And this is founded by Bill and Melinda Gates and the Rockefeller Foundations. It's launched in 2006 and had the vision of doubling agricultural yields, the incomes of 30 million small-scale producers and households. of halving poverty in 20 African countries by 2020. And AGRA received over $1 billion from Bill and Melinda Gates, the US, UK, and German governments. And the money was spent to promote industrial agriculture to supply distant commodity markets, and it's based on GMOs, imported synthetic pesticides, and fertilizers. So what happened? Well, instead of halving hunger, the situation of the 13 focus countries deteriorated. The number of people suffering from extreme hunger actually increased by 30% in the countries of intervention during the AGRA years. And you can see that here in this bottom line, which is Africa. You can see every year under the AGRA years to 2020 when it finished, there's an increase of 100 million people who are food insecure. And what does food insecure mean? It means there's times of the year when people do not eat, when children go to bed hungry without a meal. That is food insecurity. And why? Well, industrial agriculture is not focused on growing food. It's about monoculture cash crops for distant markets. It reduces crop diversity. So malnutrition is actually created by no longer growing the foods that people eat. So the staples that farmers used to have before, like millet, 21% decline. Cassava, 6%. Roots and tubers like sweet potatoes and taro. Sorghum, groundnuts, peanuts, all declines in yield because everything was focused on corn or maize for export markets. The problem with food security is not that we need more production systems. The world actually currently produces more than double the amount of food needed. Most of this is wasted. We do not have a food shortage. We have a problem with a distant commodity market. The hungry are too poor to buy them, and the wealthy countries in the developing world, middle classes, have too much food. Most of it is highly processed, empty of nutrition. As a result, what you see is this epidemic of obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart, liver, and other diseases due to overeating these highly processed foods empty of nutrition. So what's the key? We don't need to grow more food. We already grow twice as much. It's how we grow it and where we grow it. So let's look at who the hungry are. Well, actually, 80% of the world's hungry live in rural areas, and 50% of them are actually smallholder farmers. 20% are the people who are dependent on these farmers. And then we look at who produces the actual food that we eat. 70% of the world's food is produced by smallholder farmers. I just want to say, the 30% produced by agribusiness, most of it's not food. It goes to feed things like biodiesel or trucks and cars with methanol or factory farms and things. It's not actually produced and directly eaten. 80% of the food in the global south actually comes from smallholder farmers. So what we're seeing here now is this problem that the very people who produce most of our food are actually the food insecure. This is the crazy thing about what is happening in the planet. So logically, what we need to do is rethink how we produce. Instead of talking about commodities for distant markets, we change the priority. We put food on the table first. That's the first market, the kitchen table, and we work out from there. There's a role for all markets, including export markets. We're not saying we don't have exports, but what we're saying is we need to get our priorities right, and food on the table first is the most important. So the only practical way to nourish the world is to grow food locally where it is needed by smallholder farmers. And so we need to increase the production of smallholder farmers at local level. So can we do it? Well, the majority of smallholder farmers in the developing world are traditional farmers. Some would say organic by default. But we can work with them and teach them good regenerative organic practices such as better soil nutrition, recycling organic matter, mineral balance, improved pest and disease control, water use efficiency, especially by increasing soil organic matter, better weed management, and I'm going to say weed management rather than weed eradication, and applying agroecology to increase the biodiversity in the systems. And this leads to significant increases in yield. An example is a report done by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, that's UNCTAD, and the United Nations Environment Program. And they looked at 114 projects in Africa covering 2 million hectares and 1.9 million farmers. And the average crop yield was 116% increase for all the projects. In East Africa, actually 128% increase. So what I want to show here is all these people saying organic is low yielding. No, it doesn't have to be. With the right systems, we're talking about 100% increases in yield. I'm using Africa as an example, but we can use this for most of the farmers on the planet who are smallholder farmers on 2 hectares or less. What is really significant, it shows that since the introduction of industrial agriculture in Africa, food production per person is actually 10% lower now than in the 1960s. And what they said is that the evidence of this study supports the argument that organic agriculture is more conducive in Africa than most conventional systems. And I'd like to say, I'm using Africa as an example here, but it's the same in most of our countries. The right organic systems now, we can get higher yields. And to give you an example, one of my favorites is actually Tigray. And when I was president of IFOAM Organics International, it's one of our members who did this, and they worked with the whole community and regenerated whole landscapes. And this is, I suppose, the issue when I talk about regenerative organic. It's not just about what we do in the field, it's how we work with communities. Farmers come in communities, and they come in landscapes and ecosystems. So we've got to regenerate the bigger picture. So part of it here was to regenerate the hillsides, rehabilitate them, revegetate them. And that involved the way grazing was changed. It wasn't about stopping grazing. It's about how to put in better grazing systems. And you'll learn more about that in the African segment of this People's Food Summit, where there's some really good examples of it. Then putting in things like we call fertilizer trees like Sesbania, nitrogen trees, long grasses, using things like faba beans to increase the fertility, bring nitrogen into the fields, but also to provide a high protein food crop. And then with all this biomass, you can actually compost it and add that to the fields to improve fertility. And this is the result. It's actually 900 samples over 7 years. So this is really good data. And if you look at the lower bar, that's the traditional system, if you want to say organic by default. When we look at the green bar, and this is what I'll call regenerative organic, where we're regenerating the whole system and using compost, we've got more than double the yield. The bar next to it is actually where they use chemical fertilizers. This was not done as a purely organic program. They allowed farmers to have the choice, but the fact is, wherever compost was used, they got higher yields than the industrial or conventional systems. So farmers quickly learnt to change. So this is an example here where they were growing wheat, and it's one of those years where they got wheat rust, and the composted fields had virtually no rust. The fields grown with chemical fertilizers ended up being affected by rust and needed to be sprayed with a fungicide. So this is the wheat that got the rust, that was grown on chemical fertilizers conventionally, still sprayed with fungicides, which cost the farmers extra money, and it gave a yield of 1.6 tonnes a hectare. The wheat grown on composted soil resisted the rust and gave a yield of over 6.5 tonnes per hectare. So I suppose what I want to end on is that the majority of farmers in the world are smallholders on 2 hectares or less. They produce 80% of the food in the global south. And what we need to do is train them on regenerative organic agriculture based on the science of agroecology, because that increases yields. And the industrial agriculture system of synthetic pesticides, fertilizers, and supplying distant commodity markets has failed. It is actually responsible for what we call the diaspora of farmers, the failure of farmers. The fact is, millions of farmers are leaving their farms every year because they go into debt. This system puts them into debt. They have to borrow money for it. They don't get yields. They get crop failure, and they leave their farms. And in many places, we have mass farmer suicides as a result. It's a disaster. So we need to refocus agriculture on local production systems based on regenerative organic, and primarily to supply local markets. If we're going to feed the world, we want to put food on the kitchen table first. It doesn't mean we don't have export markets, but we need to get the priorities right. And the priority is not exporting cash crops to distant markets. For most of the world, it is growing it locally and feeding your family and your local community. And that's the evidence-based way to end food security and nourish the world. So I'll say thank you for that. And I'm happy to open it up for questions. So I can. All right, look, what I'll do now is introduce you to our next speaker and talk to Henry from Local Systems. This is an organization that specializes in local regenerative agriculture systems. So Henry, the floor is yours now. Can we? Oh, all right, Helena. Sorry, now I can see you.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't see you there. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you.
I'll introduce you first, Helena, so people know who you are.
Okay.
I've sort of inadvertently known Helena for a very long time. It's actually only recently we've met face to face, but I known about her since the 1980s from Ladakh when I was up there, and she's actually spent a long time in Ladakh in the Himalayas working with the Ladakhis, and she set up a place that I used to go to every day when I was in Ladakh, and that was the Ladakh Environmental Center. And one of the things I always remember is having wonderful food from a solar cooker. So, and it was actually one of the best libraries I'd ever been to. And it's where I learned about climate change. But how can you say, Helena is actually a lot more than just Ladakh. She's actually won the Alternative Nobel Prize, the Arthur Morgan Award, the Go Peace Prize, and she's also the author of Ancient Futures and Local is Our Future, and she's co-authored Bringing Food Economies Home and the Ground Up, and the award-winning documentary The Economics of Happiness. And Helena is the founder and director of Local Futures and the International Alliance of Localization. And she's a founding member of the International Commission on the Future of Food and Agriculture. So, Helena, what I'd like to do now is give the floor to you and take it away, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very glad to be coming after you, and so glad that you were stressing the local. That's what we need to do these days. So I'm very happy to be able to do this. And so in order to understand why local is so important, we have realized that people need to understand a little bit about globalization and even about the origins of the modern economy, and to understand that really the system that we're now struggling to change, and we really do need to change the dominant economic system, actually started because global traders got too much power. And so we've had really from the beginnings of the modern economy a way in which the local has been marginalized. And I want to show you a little film that we made about that to explain how it is that we need to really have our eye on the bigger picture in order to embrace localization as a systemic path. And we would argue that right now there's definitely room for global trade and so on in the long run, but we need an immediate shift away from policies that are supporting the big and the global at the expense of the small and the local. I hope this little film that we're going to show make that clear. It's called Local. And right after that, we'll show you another, also very short film, about less than 4 minutes, on the global food system versus the local food system. And then I'll come back on and elaborate a bit on these two short films. The first one is about 8 minutes, and the second one about 4 minutes. I hope they're going to be playing now. I've got my colleague Henry Coleman helping to show those films.
Every day on the news, we see a world hurtling from one crisis to the next.
Most of us are running faster than ever just to keep food on the table and a roof over our head.
But worst of all, we're told it's our fault. It's human nature.
It can certainly look that way, but dig a little deeper and something else emerges.
The ever-expanding global economy.
I'm afraid that didn't quite work. I think we have to go back to the beginning. You couldn't see. Yeah, maybe not.
Every day on the news, we see a world hurtling from one crisis to the next.
Most of us are running faster than ever just to keep food on the table and a roof over our head.
But worst of all, we're told it's our fault. It's human nature.
It can certainly look that way, but dig a little deeper and something else emerges.
The ever-expanding global economy.
A healthy economy is one in which humans meet their needs without destroying nature or without harming others. Our current system has brought...
Yeah, it looks like that's not working. I don't know whether we should give up on that or whether we want to give it another go. I'm trying to get a message here. I think we're trying
benefits
again.
to many people, but we are now seeing the true cost of those benefits. The cogs of the modern economy.
Shall we try then? Should we just try the short food system film and see if that works? It is so amazing how it seems to always work before, but not afterwards. I can tell you the sort of story of the film, but are we going to try the food system film?
Have you got? Sorry, have you got that in your computer, or where is it?
No, I don't have it. Henry, who's joined us.
Henry, have you got it?
His computer.
Can you see share, Henry? And it'll say share video. The joys of it all. We do rehearsals and everything works perfectly.
I know.
Look, I had the same thing with my presentation. So we always know these things happen with the technology. Okay, Henry looks like he's getting somewhere now. Let's see how we go. I've got them up. Henry, if you're having trouble, what I did is I've got them on mine and I could do it. Just see how you go. Otherwise, I'll share mine.
I think probably you should do it, Andrew, if you've got it right there, because you're obviously able to get onto the screen and everything. Can you
Henry,
do it?
do you want me to do it? I can do it. It's fine.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Okay. Hang on, just
And if it doesn't work, I'll tell people.
No, it'll work, but I've just got to. I just realised I'm still learning the technology too. So we're all
was set in motion in the late 1400s, when the elites in Europe began destroying close-knit, self-reliant communities through a process called the enclosures. They burnt crops and destroyed villages.
In the same.
It doesn't look like it's from my screen. It doesn't look as though you see the whole image. It may just be too big.
Is that Henry? Did you put that up?
Oh, did Henry put that up? Oh, okay.
Henry would have put that up, not me.
Yeah, he's asking you if you can try.
Okay, look, I'll do it. Just let me. Yeah, I'm happy.
Right, I'll speak. Let me speak a little bit. If we have an audience, I'll speak while you're doing that. Shall I?
Okay. All right.
So Henry, there's no point. You are now on screen.
Yeah, it wasn't. I can try sharing my screen now, which is another way of doing it, which seemed to be working from my end before, but it wasn't broadcasting. So I can try that now, Andre, if you prefer.
Okay, you try that, and if not, then I'll use me as plan.
Thank you, everyone, for.
Okay.
That's all right. We'll get there.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Okay, that looks all right.
No, it's good. It's all there now, Henry.
Okay, but no sound. No sound.
Turn the sound up on yours. You'll find it if you. That's it. Should work. No, it could be a bit louder.
I can't hear anything here. Yeah, I think we have to abandon. I agree with Scott. The only thing, it might be worth trying the systems film, because that's smaller and lower quality. So it might be easy to play.
Let me try to see what I can do.
I'll tell people about that film that we tried to show. It's called Local, A Story of Hope. And we made it with Damon Gameau, who's a very well-known documentary filmmaker in Australia and a close friend. He made a film called That Sugar Film. And he also made 2040, which I hope you've heard of. And he helped us put together this 8-minute attempt at showing why it's so important that we understand how the global economy has been misshaping our world for a very long time. And this misshaping has escalated in the last 30, 35 years. And I, along with people like Vandana Shiva, who's part of this program, I started a forum on globalization where we were studying the impact of trade treaties on different countries around the world. And it became very obvious that the biggest losers were small farmers, because these trade treaties were allowing giant agribusinesses to have complete freedom to move as they liked, to have no restrictions. And for quite a while now, they are actually pressuring our governments, forcing our governments to sign in black and white that the governments will not do anything to decrease their profit-making potential. So we have now a global casino economy that has these heavy subsidies and is being deregulated, while at the national and local level, everyone is being subjected to heavy taxation and heavy regulation. And the heavy regulation when it comes to small-scale farming and small-scale restaurants, food producers, shops even, the regulation is often brought in to destroy small competitors. So we're not talking here about bad people and good people, but we are talking about a blindness to the way that the global economy has got out of control. And there is a very clear way to control it. As long as people are aware that this is the main reason behind climate change, behind poverty, extinction of biodiversity, and so on. So that's the general framing. And we have for a very long time in my organization been promoting local food economies. And we're finding that all around the world, when people start shortening the distances, that you see almost immediately multiple benefits. But let's see now if we can look at that food system film that contrasts the global food economy with a multitude of more localized systems.
Okay, let's give this a go and see if we can
Okay,
do it.
let's see if this works.
No, why isn't it?
How does it work?
Can everybody see that now?
So this also doesn't seem to work. So we'll have to give up on that. It's basically, I will say, what it's just nice when you can have the music and the images. No, so we'll stop it now. Yeah, we'll give up on it, shall we?
One other, if you want to try it.
Sorry?
I can try this one here. Just see how we go with this. Can you see this one?
More. Now that's not working either.
Is that working?
What do we all
Right.
really care about? We all want time for friends and family, a world in which everyone has enough to eat and a roof over their head, clean air, clean water, a stable climate. That's what we want.
Yeah, we'll have to give up. It's fine. It's, anyway, I'm here. So I've got it all in my head, on my body, because I've been at this for so long. And I...
Subsidized corporate...
So what our problem is in our organization is that it's almost impossible to get this message out. We have a very common sense, clear message, which I am convinced most people would agree with, but it's almost impossible to get it out because we are threatening the large corporate bodies that now dominate the social media as well as the mainstream media. And unfortunately, even the environmental movements, the food movements, most of us have actually been directed to look at things in too local a way. Paradoxically, we're promoting localization, but we're warning about a perspective that is too narrowly local. Too many people are caught up in seeing the problems in their own country at best, and usually, in their own region, but very often, to the extent that they look at the bigger picture, they'll be looking at their government. So we hear all the time, well, in Australia, we've got this really bad way of doing this and that. And we hear the same thing in Kenya, we hear the same thing in Bhutan, we hear the same thing in Sweden, where I come from. Almost no one has been briefed with looking at the global picture. Those who have been looking globally have usually been the purveyors of rampant consumerism and an imposition of a consumer monoculture that is disastrous for most of the human race. It fundamentally creates the illusion that farmers are backward and primitive. So it has a huge impact on the global south, on those farmers that Andre was talking about, who are now producing 80% of the food. Those farmers are day by day being pressured psychologically with a type of enormous psychological pollution that makes them feel that farming is backward, primitive, and they're doing everything they can to borrow and even, just devote their whole lives now to helping their children get an education that will take them to the city. So we have forces now that are psychologically pressuring towards urbanization and the destruction of farming. The end goal of this algorithmic system, which is what it is now, come back to that, will be 100% urbanization and food production in the hands of robots. Robots linked to drones, linked to satellites to monitor carbon. We really urgently need to wake up to the fact that this system cannot work. It will not work. It's based on extracting minerals from every possible source. The rare earth minerals that are needed, and that now mean that we're locked into sort of warlike competition over these minerals in the deepest seabed and on Mars, and of course destroying the Congo, etc. The resources that go into this search for energy, even as part of the Green New Deal, where we're supposedly going to be able to fuel all this with renewable energy, but we're not. We are not going to be able to do that without being even more destructive than we have been in the era of oil. So I hope, what I'm saying for some people will be quite shocking. It will feel a bit overwhelming because we're talking about a big system for sure. But I so want you to take home this message that it pays off enormously to look at the big picture, because the big picture that organizations like ours are bringing is not only the evidence of the destructive nature and the absolutely dead end that's going to come if we continue in the same direction, but we are bringing information also about the very clear evidence that going a bit slower, going a bit smaller, going more local instead of global brings with it enormous benefits. Where you can see this most clearly is when you study food production. What you will see is that, first of all, as I said before, this system started by driving people off the land, and big traders were able to benefit from slavery and enclosures. With the enclosures, people were being driven off the land into London, which was a complete mess, ill health, crime, breakdown, because there was this rapid exploitative pressure that destroyed people's land-based, smaller scale, human scale institutions, where they had developed ways of working with each other, interdependent with their communities, with their region, with the land. Now suddenly these enormous global forces were contributing to this breakdown of that local fabric. Now, we don't need to go all the way back to that because, well, I think it helps us to understand that this has been a continuum. And it may also help us to realize that the drivers of that change, those real trading barons, were overtly racist, overtly misogynist, overtly anti-nature. You can see it in their writings. So in a fundamental way, we are dealing with this patriarchal and very destructive system. However, we would argue that culturally, the majority of people have actually been turning away from those values. Particularly if we look at the cultural trajectory, we'll see that in the Victorian era, it may be that most people bought into these values in the West. In Victorian England, people generally probably thought that other people were inferior and that it was okay that they should be slaughtered or even hunted like animals. But we can see this huge cultural progress where people have clearly changed away from this racism, away from the misogyny, and very clearly want to develop a better relationship with nature. Now, that cultural shift is what lies behind also the massive localization movement, which is coming up from the bottom up. I say massive because it is everywhere, and yet most of the initiatives are small and they're not so visible. But to come back to frame this, or rather to spell out how this is so important for anyone concerned with food and farming, we need to look at the fact that, again, from the very beginning, this involved pushing people towards monocultural production. So the slaves who were pushed away from producing a range of things for themselves were suddenly on cotton plantations, tea plantations, coffee plantations. And what we can see in the modern era is that this process was exacerbated and continued by the so-called cheap fossil fuels. So that in the industrialized world, particularly after the Second World War, hundreds of millions of farmers were destroyed by replacing them with technology. The technologies that were used were, of course, the machinery, but also the chemicals, the chemical fertilizers, the chemical pesticides, all coming from fossil fuels, all coming out of the war machinery. From the bottom up, we've had a people's movement rejecting this. We've had very strong pressure, which has led to government support for organics, which has led to corporate interest in organics. But unfortunately, the reality is that because, particularly as I said in the last 35 years, corporations already had so much power that they were able to wiggle their way out of actually responding to what people wanted. People wanted a better relationship with nature. They were demanding healthier organic food. And what happened is that well-intentioned, I knew many of them personally, including Maurice Strong, who organized the big meeting in Rio in 1992, where basically the world's environmental movement gathered. And there, because corporate heads were involved in having funded the entire conference, the framing didn't look at the problems with giant corporations and with the way that they had been amassing their wealth through global trade and through an imposition of larger and larger monocultures, destroying diversified production for local needs, for regional needs, for even national needs. Suddenly, well, I should say gradually, but very much, very clearly spelled out in the Rio meeting. And a lot of this had started by the mid-80s. There was no longer a demand, as there had been in the 70s and early 80s, for decentralization, for decentralized renewable energy. Now, what we were doing was looking at symptoms, starting to look at climate change, starting to talk about biodiversity, about forests, about water, about indigenous people, about women, but not about the system that was continuing to drive the world towards monoculture. Now, the monocultures can never, ever produce as much as diversified farms and fields can. Now, you could take any two bits of land, and I can guarantee, whether it's a square meter or a square kilometer of land, diversity on one, monoculture on the other, you will always be able to produce much more with diversified production. Where we can see this very clearly is in the local food movement, where small farms closely linked to their market are able to diversify, in many cases to the point of 100 different species or more, including animals, very important in the cycle, to produce fertilizer that is then ends up being a carbon sink. It's the animal factories that are the most cruel, the most hideous, the most wasteful form of production. People farmed for thousands of years, actually tens of thousands of years, involving animals and animal products, and they did not create climate change. So you have this craziness right now that we're just talking about carbon. We're not talking about diversity. We're not talking about healthy water, healthy ecosystems, healthy people. And above all, we're not talking about how more localized systems, where we shorten the distance between production and consumption, how those systems can produce 10 times, even 100 times more food. And when you add biomass, you add fiber for clothing, you add building materials from wood, etc., you're getting, vastly more productive systems. The key thing that keeps us from implementing this on a much larger scale is that our economic system has ensured that we have heavy subsidies for energy and technology, and that human labor, by contrast, is far too expensive. The more diversified small farms require, and the beauty of it is that they do employ far more people. And in the new local food movements around the world, what we're seeing is this higher productivity, more jobs. We're seeing the reduction, of course, massive reduction in the transport, the emissions, the refrigeration, massive reduction in plastic. We're seeing the rebuilding of the community fabric. There are countless examples now around the world. This is particularly in the more industrialized parts of the world. But even in cities like Beijing, even in New Delhi, people are beginning to bring back that closer relationship between the consumer and the farmer. And they are demonstrating that, number one, we should be doing everything we can to protect those farmers who in the so-called South are producing 80% of the food. They need protection. We need to be aware that trade deregulation is the biggest threat to their well-being. We need to start lobbying for a very clear demand that we push the pause button on further bilateral or multilateral trade treaties. We need to be lobbying for new trade treaties that start shifting the power away from the global to support the local. We want to see a deregulation at the local level, and we want to see local communities, local governments involved both in the shaping and the implementation of those regulations, because local knowledge systems are vital for maintaining biodiversity. The death of knowledge systems, which is linked to the death of languages, the death of cultures, is one of the most frightening fatalities in this global system, promoting agricultural monoculture and human monoculture, consumer monoculture. So this is a very big picture, and I hope that people will look at more of our materials. We have a film called The Economics of Happiness that tries to spell out this bigger picture. Because we call it the economics of happiness, because one of the most important ingredients in this transition back towards reconnecting with our farmers, reconnecting with nature, rebuilding community, is that it answers the deep human need for connection. We are witnessing epidemics of depression, anxiety, addiction. I hope some of you will have heard of Gabor Mate, who is one of the wise voices in raising awareness about the fact that this trauma and all of these addictions, anxiety, are linked to our disconnection, to our lack of feeling a sense of belonging to community, a sense of belonging to place, to the natural world. So this big picture offers enormous hope, because there are so many examples that demonstrate what I'm saying. However, help us get this out. And if you haven't heard about this bigger picture, please inform yourself, spread the word. Right now, as Andre was saying, we're talking about the majority of farmers on this planet who are still producing the majority of food on this planet. So we mustn't fall into the trap of believing that all is lost, that life is going to end in another decade. No, there is a chance to turn things around. There is a chance to right now contribute in a way that will be truly meaningful. Often our ignorance about what's going on the other side of the world prevents us from seeing these opportunities. Our work started on the other side of the world, as Andre was saying, in Ladakh, where I had the amazing opportunity to live in an indigenous culture, speaking the language fluently before the advent of the modern world. So I had an incredible gift, also an incredible sort of responsibility, I have to say, because very few people have actually experienced a functioning, healthy, indigenous local culture. Even Christianity started a lot of the destruction, a very long time ago. And of course, the global economic system has been at it for hundreds of years. So I hope that you will look at our materials, read about Ladakh. Bhutan is also a place where we worked over several years. And this is a story of hope. Localization is the economics of happiness, it's the economics of health, ecological well-being, human well-being are completely linked. And there is a way forward that we can start engaging with right now. Our latest tool that we can offer you is a localization guide that suggests actions that you can take immediately to help move the world in this direction. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Look, Helena, thank you so much. The fact is, you didn't need to have videos. You did a great job. Look, I did post links for the videos in the chat. So it's on Facebook and also YouTube. So people, if you want to see the videos, there's links there. Please go and have a look at them. I can tell you they're really worth watching. And look, just quickly, we've got a few minutes. I'd like to just do one question before we go over to the next speakers. And this is from Matthew Magnuson. And I think it's actually a really important question that needs to be answered. And he says, same here in the US, we subsidize mega farms to the point that has destroyed local farmer. On the hopeful side, there are many large cities where smaller farms in the city are popping up. So would you like to just...
Yeah, I would actually, I would really like to comment on that, because I want all of you to be very aware that there's huge propaganda for 100% urbanization. So there is a whole machine. It's a machine-like algorithmic creation of a fake casino where literally fake money is being created. It's linked to Wall Street. I mean, Wall Street linked to Silicon Valley and probably to the Pentagon, to the war machine. And so we have to be careful when we say about farms in the city, because part of the sort of propaganda they're putting out is that there will be these farms in the city because we're going to have AI-driven cars and there won't be any traffic somehow, I don't know. And it's all going to be walking distance. But it's a completely false reality, as I said, based on all that mining, based on total control, where we will have no power over our own lives, that will not enable us to rebuild those deep connections to nature and to have greater control over our lives and to allow diversity to flourish. So there are farms in the city, some of which are wonderful, but beware of the propaganda for urbanization. And most of the ones I know about are actually farms on the edge of cities that have linked up with the city center. And this is what cities need to do now. They need to start to rebuild those relationships. Because I didn't mention before, but we have this insanity where our food is coming from further and further away, and countries are routinely importing and exporting the same product. Milk in, milk out, beef in, beef out. And then food is being transported across the world to be processed as well. So shortening the links is happening. It's wonderful. And some in the city too are good.
Thank you so much, Helena. It's just wonderful. And I hope people actually enjoyed this segment. we're trying to present a global overview here of one of the most important issues and where we have to prioritize our systems. If we want to nourish this planet and have fairness, we need to localize. And that doesn't mean we don't have exports and all the other things to do with it, but it's getting the balance right. If we're going to feed people, nourish people, we put food on the table first and we work out from there. And as Helen has said, small is the best. So what I want to do now is we go from being global to being local, and we go to South Australia. Graham, I hope you can hear me.
So I can.
I want to talk, I'd love to introduce you now as someone who I think is one of the best examples that we have in Australia on a biodiverse local permaculture system. One of the pioneers of permaculture systems, a food forest. And I love it because that's actually what my farm is as well. is a diverse food forest. I have over 100 species of fruits, as well as all the other plants. And Graham's whereas my place isn't open to the public to educating, it's my own private farm. Graham has been one of the great influences and educators in Australia on permaculture systems, local systems, incredible diversity of production. So Graham, I'll hand it over to you now, and if you can tell people about what you do and your remarkable story, please.
Andre, just let us see if we can get some PowerPoint kind of up.
Just click the share and see how you go.
Share, because let's go to his image.
Can you see the share down below?
Minimize this.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. And share.
Yeah.
Yep. Share.
Screen.
Yep.
Share screen.
And then you need to probably
something like that.
Which is your PowerPoint presentation? Is that on the screen?
When we did the rehearsal, it seemed to be so easy, and for some reason now it's not being so good. What I found, I went to share and then did share screen, and then I had to go back into my main one and turn and just take it from my menu and play it.
Okay, so here it comes up. If I go share on PowerPoint, it comes up with please sign into Office to share your presentation. Is that what you mean?
I don't know.
No, let's just not go there because again, minimize this. So again, share.
Just get it up normally. Once you go to share, and you should be able to just see, it'll say Windows, and you should be able to just find it and click on it.
Wait a minute.
And then just go to, just go into your menu, and just go on to PowerPoint. And just open the PowerPoint as normal from your computer, and it should come up.
So share, what we got here? Entire screen, window, tab. Well, this is not it. So you're saying we should close down the PowerPoint?
No, keep the PowerPoint open.
Yeah, it's open.
Just keep it open, but you should be able to. Can you see the share at the bottom of this screen?
At the moment, I've got PowerPoint taking up the whole thing. Wait a minute.
Okay, look, just close it out for the time being, and just close it.
Like close the PowerPoint altogether?
Yep. Just close it all together. And okay, just. Okay.
If you'd like to email me the file, if you'd like to continue talking, I can try sharing it from my screen.
Well, I already have sent the PowerPoint to Andre's email address or the
Dropbox.
The Dropbox.
It's in the Dropbox. It's in the Dropbox, Scott. Do you want to?
What's the name of this file?
Find it there?
What's the name of the file?
Graham Brookman.
Okay, just give me a few minutes if you want. I can you can continue talking, and then I'll work to pull that up.
Open the screen and have it, then you can see. No, go open your PowerPoint.
What am I doing?
Just open it. Here we go. It's Tim. Hello, Tim.
Where are you going?
Look, Graham, what we'll do is I'll get you to just email it to me, and I'll email it to Scott, and we'll just get Tim to go on for the time being. Okay, that's probably the easiest until we work it all out. So,
it's huge. So I'll email it as a PDF. Is that all right?
Yeah, look, just email it as a PDF. That's fine. Okay, it'll be perfectly all right. You've got my email. Just send it to me, and I'll send it off to Scott, and we'll work it all out. Okay. It'll all be good.
Sorry to muck you around.
No, don't worry. Look, I had the same problem, and I'm one of the organisers. So, actually, what I actually think it is, seriously, it's our Australian internet. It's just everybody else has really good broadband, and we've got bad band or something. That's another story. So we'll just, we'll just get by. Most of us know what we're talking about. So if we don't have PowerPoint slides, we can still.
That's hopeful.
Not the end of the world. So what I'd like to do now is introduce another really old friend of mine and good friend, and one of the real, how can you say, I'll even go back to say pioneers of the organic sector in Australia. And one of the people actually started certification systems in Australia. And despite all that, he's still involved in it. And he is the chair of the oldest certification organisation in Australia called NASA, the National Association of Sustainable Agriculture Australia. Some people do get it mixed up with this other organisation. And I was actually with a previous chair once at a meeting, and when he said he came from NASA, somebody wanted to sell him organic rocket fuel. But that's another story. But Tim, anyway, Tim's actually written lots of books. He's an expert on standards all around the world, and he's also, can I say, he's worked for iPhone, probably been to more organic farms than nearly anyone except for me, and probably knows more about the organic sector around the world in Australia. But today, this is Australia, so he's going to talk about Australia. And Tim, let's see if we can get your PowerPoint to work. I've got a copy here, so if it doesn't work, I'll do it for you. Okay.
Righto. So you want me to try and launch?
Yeah, you try and launch. Just go to share. See what happens.
Yeah.
You see the share button?
Yeah.
And then a little window should come up. But go to a window. You see a menu. Go to the menu.
Oh yeah, yeah, got him.
In the middle, and you'll see all the different windows come up. And then click on your PowerPoint. What you'll see this is entire screen, but go to window instead. That one, you see that?
Yeah, yeah.
And you should be able to, if you go through there, you should be able to see a version with your PowerPoint, one of those. If you should be able to click on that, and you should be able to see where it says share and share it.
Yeah, no, I've got 7 screens and none of them is a PowerPoint.
Yeah, but one should be a picture.
Yeah.
You should see an image of your PowerPoint in one of those screens. If you click on that.
I'm not seeing it, unfortunately.
Okay, that's weird. All right, look, let
well, hang on, just try this. No, I'm not seeing it. Sorry, I think it's best.
I've got it. So let me do it now. Okay, and we'll see how we go. And you just say next slide, okay, and speak to it. So okay, where are we now? Can everybody see that? Can you see the slide?
No, not seeing it. Here it is. Good.
It's up now?
Yeah.
Okay, look, Tim, you talk to it and just say next slide each time you want me to change the slide now, okay?
Okay. Now can you actually launch that? Because I'm seeing
No, leave it like that. I can launch it. Try that now. Can you see that?
Well, no, that's better. Yeah. All right. So look, that's just the holding slide. So it's just got the logos of a few organisations. So go to the next slide.
Okay.
Can
you see that?
Yeah.
Next slide. Good.
That's this is just an introduction to myself. So your local compost nut case, best known probably for my working in compost, writer, a trainer, founding chairperson of NASA and the current chairperson of NASA. So I'd like to say that I had a 32-year gap year, and then more recently, founding chair of Organic Consumers Association, that now passed on to our friend Simon Jones, and many different roles as Andre has suggested in especially in the Australian organic scene, but also around the world. Next slide, please. So for me, this is what it's all about. It's really about healthy soil. So it's also about healthy food, healthy people, healthy environment and biodiversity, fair trade and healthy communities. More recently, of course, it's importantly about carbon sequestration and averting climate change. But soil is fundamental to all of those things. So soil still remains for me the fundamental of what we're trying to get. And if you can see the detail in that little picture there, it shows soil that's full of holes, which is generally a good thing in soil. It's full of full of life. You can see the earthworms, and importantly, full of good, healthy roots. And if you can see that picture up close, those roots are white. They're healthy, and they're full of root hairs. Next picture, please. Okay, so what are some of the issues? At the moment, I would say that we're facing a major period of conventionalisation pressure on organic standards. So conventionalisation, the attempt to try to make organic standards look a lot more like conventional agriculture, to make concessions to conventional practice. So this is interesting that after decades of denying the value of organic, not just denying the value of organic, but even denying that organic was possible, industry and government now want a share of what organic can offer. They want the trade dollars, they want the sustainable development goals benefits and the carbon credits, and they want the consumer claims. They want the kudos with consumers. Do they really care the way we do in the organic movement? Sometimes, but if they want the claim enough, they're quite prepared to utilise what we call greenwashing. So next slide, please, Andre. So specifically coming to some standards issues, we've got good export regulation in Australia, and the government takes good care of that, but we have completely inadequate domestic control over organic claims. Now, we have really good general consumer legislation in Australia. So, but how to activate that for organic issues is really a real problem, because the authorities don't really understand organic. They don't have any expertise. They find it very difficult, and in the absence of domestic legislation, what it really comes down to is it has to be a pretty big and obvious fib before the conventional authorities really get interested at all. So I've listed here a couple of the major issues for me. Aquaponics is not listed in the standards at all. And I guess from my perspective, what we operate in organic is what we call a positive standard. In other words, if it doesn't appear in the standard positively, then if it isn't positively mentioned, then we shouldn't be using it. And we also have pressures for hydroponics, which is clearly not permitted in the standard. Now, the picture that you see on that slide shows what's purportedly an aquaponic system. And I can imagine environments in which aquaponics might be permitted in organic, but they might be permitted when they involve a whole system, especially involving truly involving the fish aspect of that as run as a complete system. I look at that picture there, which is of a certified operation, and I see a type of aquaponic arrangement which looks to me very much like hydroponics. In fact, I suspect that really this is trying to get a foot in the door for the next stage, which is hydroponics. This is the straw man, if you like, that's trying to get us to loosen up standards. And while this operation claims to be aquaponic, there are 2 or 3 hydroponic operations of very large scale that are looking at this certified operation and saying, if they can do this, we should be able to be there too. So a couple of the other issues that are definitely on the plate at the moment, pressure for Australia to introduce GM contamination levels into our standards. Currently, our standards have 0 tolerance for GM residues, and we have had farmers now who, at least one major farmer that we know of, who's lost their certification because of GM contamination, unfortunately. So now there's a lot of pressure for us to loosen up on GM regulations for organic. There's a major pressure for container production without derogation. There are certain conditions in our standard where we might allow a bit of container production, and I'll give an example of that in shortly. There really, in Australia, we have very, very limited role for any synthetic products in any aspect of organic production at all. We do have a single allowance in the major standard that we use in Australia for synthetic amino acid fed to poultry, and this really comes down. I think I will raise that again in another slide shortly. There are issues with genuine pasture access for poultry, and the major issue really is this complete lack of domestic regulation. We have a very good standard that applies to export, but from a legal perspective, it has a limited role in a domestic situation. We have a domestic standard sitting there which has the potential to be really involved with and really useful in the domestic environment, but at the moment it's not maintained, and there are some questions about whether that standard will survive into the future. So what we have at the moment also is standards and certification management system that is controlled by the certification bodies themselves. Most of the places around the world that I'm familiar with, the certification bodies themselves have a very limited role in controlling, for instance, the standard. And the general view would be that that's how it should be, that to actually have the standard and certification process in the control of the certification bodies is inviting conflict of interest. So we have generally this pressure to reduce the obligations of standards. Next slide, please, Andre, if you can. So here's an example of container production. So container production is permitted in the standard for the production of seedlings. There's a small allowance that it may be permitted under a derogation for reasons such as soil health issues. But those rules are stretched for consumer products, as you can see in this image. This is basically a container-grown lettuce available in major supermarkets across Australia. You can see from the picture that it's grown in a pot and extracted. This is not for replanting, which is what this standard allows you to do. This is clearly sold as an edible product. But lacking domestic regulation, well, I can look clearly at this product and say that doesn't conform to the standard. There really isn't a mechanism at the moment to get this product removed from the shelves. So next slide, please. So what can we do about it? Well, we can lobby our governments, so federal, state and local government systems in Australia. We're facing a major federal election the next year. So really, in the lead up to an election, nothing happens. And nothing's likely to happen probably for 6 months after the next election, because I suspect we'll have a change of government. We'll certainly have a change of positions, and a shifting of seats at the table, even if the current government is returned. So I guess we're preparing the case now to lobby governments heavily next year to give us domestic legislation. Somehow we need to rescue the control of those standards back from the certification bodies. And I say here the rogue certification bodies. I'd like to think that some of the certification bodies with whom I have closer ties are responsible and can see the point of having a more representative, genuinely representative system in charge of the standard. So domestic legislation has really got to be our priority, and we need some sort of enforcement. We don't need just the legislation, we need enforcement. So we need to lobby our industry to support our reasonably new peak body. Andre had a long history as the chair of the Organic Federation of Australia, which was well recognised as our peak body. But currently we have more than one claim to be a peak body. Even though some of those claims are spurious, they make it difficult to put a solid case to consumers and to government. We need to introduce into our Australian organic industry better concepts of organic breeds and organic varieties. So we follow the way this is happening in Europe, but it's had very little impact in Australia, and hence the need for synthetic inputs into our chickens, because we're trying to take a chicken that comes from an industrial system and put it back into a pasture system and expect it to perform. One of my friends says it's like trying to buy a Ferrari and run it on unleaded petrol. It just isn't going to work. And then we need to work on consumers. So we need consumers to be better informed about the choices that they have in this system. Consumers really should have the power in this system because they control the dollars. But it's very hard when there is without the domestic legislation and without that strong recognition of our peak body to get the attention of consumers. So we still work very hard on that. Consumers really are where the answer lies, because consumers ultimately control where they spend their dollars, and they can put pressure back on industry and government. So next slide, please, Andre. So also we can address some of these problems with a bit of innovation. One of the next things that I hope to be involved with, we've certainly made a start in introducing PGS systems into Australia. Until last year, we had only one proper, true operating PGS operation in Australia with about 7 or 8 years of experience behind it. We now have probably 7 or 8. Not all of those are really functioning particularly well, but there is a lot of interest. So one of the things we can do with PGS is we can avert the slide of small growers away from certification. So because of the cost of certification, a number of small growers believe that they don't need it, and so then we have the normal problems of trust and how the consumers really know. So PGS can answer a lot of those problems. Generally, small growers are attracted to PGS, and I guess I'm of the view that usually small growers have less pressure to try and change the standards, to conventionalise the standards. They have less reason, for instance, to use those synthetic amino acids, and usually the small growers don't, because pasture is completely adequate. The farmers' markets are actually one of the main places that the concept of PGS is developing. Farmers' markets are generally the place where a number of growers come together and have common interests. So I believe that farmers' markets will be the core resource out of which PGS develops in Australia. There's also, I think, some possibility, especially in one state of Victoria, that there are quite a few box delivery schemes and a few CSA schemes, and I think that some of them may coalesce together to actually form a statewide PGS. And also, as part of this, I think that it's my view that in our Western developed economies, we do not understand the concept of what fair trade is. We completely understand what fair trade is for for a New Guinea coffee grower or for a black pepper grower in Sumatra, but I don't think when we have growers facing multinational food companies and supermarkets and the contracts that they offer them, I don't think that we know really how to approach that from a fair trade perspective. So we can also introduce some new standards. So we're watching very carefully the North American situation with the introduction of organic regenerative certification. And I guess my concept for that is that we need to have, until I learned about organic regenerative, I used to call it a AAA organic system of some sort, which delivers on the principles. Mainly at the moment, the principles sit in all of our standards, but we certify, we inspect to what we call the requirements, and the principles get forgotten or left behind. So we need a system where we again address the principles. And then, of course, as always, we need education. We need consumers to understand what a genuine organic product is and the benefits that genuine organic production can deliver. We need them to understand the nutritional benefits, the avoidance of chemicals, and importantly, in the current era, the climate change impacts. Andre is someone who's very aware that also that this whole idea of chemicalization of the environment will become really important into the future, as well as climate change. So will people, will industry, will government listen? Possibly. And the more we can generally
just wind up with this slide, because
sure. The more we can deliver on those sustainability goals, the more they will be interested. So I think that's. I'm happy to finish there. Next slide, please, if you will. I think there's one more.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, right, that's it.
Look, thanks, Tim. I really appreciate that, because it's a really important view of the organic sector in Australia, and a very comprehensive one. And it raises a whole range of issues that we need to address as we move forward. So, Graham, I'll give you another go again, and let's see how we can do. Just hang on, where are we now? Okay. So just hold on. What I'll do. Why isn't that doing? Just let me stop and start again. Okay.
Hey, I can see it.
I can see yours. Oh, okay. I can't. Just let me. I've got. Just let me try it again. Why isn't it doing what it's supposed to do? Okay. Is everybody see yours now, Graham?
I can see me, you, and Tim at the moment, as well as my slides.
Can you see your slides? Okay. All right. Let's see what we can do. I think if we can do it this way, and you just say move slides.
Yeah. So you just kind of you're just a little bit high. You've got half of the second slide on my screen at the moment. Or yeah,
Okay,
no,
what
you're
about
right.
that?
That's
Okay,
smack,
and just tell
smack
me to
on.
move it as we go, and let's go through it. Look, we're starting to run a bit late now, so
Yeah,
if you can just try and
I'll
get through it, so Carolyn can also have a chance as well. Please.
Yes. Okie dokie. So Graham and Anna Marie Brookman, and we've got a small permaculture farm in Adelaide, South Australia. Next slide, please. I was sort of cruising around doing a bit of a working holiday in Europe, and met Anna Marie there. And we went through, I think it was about 30 countries looking at agricultural systems, and trying to find something that was just a little bit sustainable. And there we are in Holland and Ethiopia and various places. Next slide. So I'm going to be rocketing through these, Andre.
Thank you.
So
it, Graham.
we didn't have any money, so we were happy to get other jobs and capitalise the property slowly. But we very carefully went through a decision-making process, and we bought that block, which is in yellow there. And you can see the Gawler River wiggling out towards the sea going along our northern boundary. We actually borrowed the money to buy the farm from the guy who sold us the farm, which is a bit novel. Next slide. So looking at what we sort of had, both of us had some agricultural skills, and we ended up with 11 hectares of land on an alluvial flood flat. So the river had sort of flowed down historically, and so we got about 5 meters of really beautiful silt, and under that you've got quite a bit of groundwater, which has been declining and getting saltier as time goes by, and a rainfall which was around 450 millimeters. And of course here we've got a Mediterranean climate with hot dry summers and cool wet winters. The soil that looked so fantastic actually had less than 1% carbon, so there was a lot of fixing up to do. Next slide, please. And we looked at all of these regenerative strategies, I guess, to see how we would actually tackle rebuilding the farm. And it was one of the first farms actually developed in South Australia. So the house we live in is, built in 1840, and so the fair bit of damage had been done to the soil, and we were presented, I guess, with all of these terrific kind of techniques, and many of them from Australia. And we chose permaculture, in fact. Next slide, thanks. And these the two lunatics that designed the whole system of permaculture, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, from the University of Tasmania. And they didn't just design something to fix up a bit of soil. They actually tackled the big question of how we have a relationship with the planet which can last 1,000 years, and an actual permanent agriculture. And so it ended up being called permaculture. And they realised very early on that if we got the right relationship with the planet, the agricultural stuff would take care of itself. So it's really simple in that there's just 3 ethics: care of the earth, care of community, and take a bit of responsibility for it. So actually do what you talk about rather than sitting in your armchair and prognosticating without walking the talk. So those 3 ethics guide all of the decisions that we make on a daily basis, and it's a very easy way. It's a very helpful way to guide your life. Next slide, thanks. So this was the mission statement that we kind of dreamed up for our little piece of land. So 20 hectares we've ended up with, demonstrate that land can be managed environmentally. And a lot of these examples we saw overseas were very inspiring, but we couldn't see how they would apply in South Australia, which has always been an export-based sort of technically strong agriculture, which has adopted, all of these high energy inputs and so forth. Then if we could actually get something that worked, how to share that information and develop skills for land management, and also to bring up our kids in a beautiful place, and we've done that, and they've both left us. So yeah, one lot in Tassie and one lot in New Zealand. I think they reckon that climate change is going to dry us out to a crisp before we can repair things. Next slide, thanks, Andre. So we called it the food forest. That was a term that Bill Mollison dreamed up at one stage, but it really is just sort of saying we are going to build a system of lots and lots of layers of vegetation, which is going to absorb all of the energy that is falling on it from the sun. We're going to give it enough water so that we've got sort of 7 layers that convert sunlight into food energy and fiber energy. And it's a wonderful thing, and it works really well, but it does, you know, use a fair bit of water. But that's the food forest anyway. Let's have a bit more of a look at it. Next slide. So right from the start, I think you have to back some strong horses. And so what were the key things that we had to get right to make this enterprise sustainable? So it was no use just putting a few sheep and you know, growing a bit of grain on a miserable 20 hectares, which is nothing in Australia. So we would have been completely unviable economically. So we started by planting windbreaks to drop wind speed and evaporation, and put in deep-rooted perennial species like pistachios, and we popped in some irrigation so we could actually grow veggies which we could sell to earn some capital. And almost straight away we started running these little short courses showing people how they could keep chooks, grow veggies, and generally kind of plan a sustainable farm. Next one. We were extremely optimistic, and so we bought the neighbour, and they had some really good infrastructure, and so we'd had, for the first time we owned a house, and we actually had 3-phase electricity and a few other good things, so that was very important. Next slide. Next one. Next, of course, is water. This is the driest state in the driest inhabited continent, so it is a little bit of a preoccupation that South Australians have. So we don't let water run off our place. It's all detained until it sinks in. And we have got this miserable little river running past us. And so sometimes it's got reasonable water, and oftentimes it's quite salty. And so we won't actually withdraw any water that's higher than 850 parts per million dissolved salt. And we try to do better than that. It means that we can actually inject that water from the river, which is heading off out to sea, into our aquifer and make the aquifer less salty. So our system that we have at the moment enables us to irrigate 10 hectares, and we use drip irrigation because it saves a huge amount of water and it avoids watering weeds, which is always rather wasteful. Next one. So out of the river into a pond through a filter. So this water that we're actually putting into the aquifer, which is 70 metres under the farm, is like you know, bottled water. It's crystal clear. So we have the Environment Protection Agency Authority in South Australia who are watching us all the time, making sure that we're not going to bugger up their precious aquifer. And it is a wonderful thing. I mean, we can put lots and lots of water there and it's not going to evaporate at all. It's a wonderful way of storing water, and something that Mollison was particularly keen on. Next one. This is a natty little way of actually putting water into the shallow aquifer, which is relatively unregulated. And it's where you get this overland water, which is perhaps flooding an area, and I saw a lot of it in India. But here we just pump water out of the river, and it goes into this kind of a pit. And there's an old concrete water pipe which has been dug down to the first shallow aquifer, sandy aquifer, that little yellow kind of aquifer there. And the water kind of builds up in the trough, and then it overflows into the pipe through a coarse filter. And down it goes, and the water just disappears at about 3 litres per second. So we are really filling up that shallow aquifer, and all of our trees, our carobs, pistachios, they can all just get that water from the aquifer. So it's a very cheap way of irrigating, and it really means we're not wasting anything, and we're repairing an aquifer that was perfectly good, you know, 100 years ago or so when the white settlers came. Next one. we're really lucky in that we had this stormwater drain running past us, and I've been thinking for a long time that there's enough water running down that drain to water our farm about 10 times over. And so we've worked with the local council, and so I think everyone who owns a bit of land needs to sort of think, is there any little thing that's, can give us access to nutrients or water? And whether it's you're getting some veggie scraps from your local shop, or you're getting stormwater from your council, these things are incredibly valuable, because it's nutrients and water that really drive the whole thing, taking for granted that the sun and the atmosphere do the rest. Yep, next one. Oh, well, giving you a bit of an idea of the actual, enterprises on the farm. Pistachio is the most important, and then we have about 150 other varieties, and so we are a very, very mixed farm, and that helps us with our marketing. We've got a 1,000 square metre market garden, and that gives us continuous income through the year and feeds us. A big food processing shed where we can do all the value adding, sort of dehydration, cracking, dehydrating, fermentation, and we've got invested in photovoltaics, so most of our power comes from the sun. And then we have a very big composting outfit, so anything that was once alive becomes composted ultimately, and I expect I will one of these days, when I no longer can make my way around the farm, I'll just be dumped in another compost heap. Next one. So that's roughly what it looks like. It looks pretty dry in summer. So the stuff inside the red lines is the property. But you'll notice the river down the northern boundary, and it's a wonderful biological resource. So there's every little beneficial insect and bird that you can think there, and it means that we can grow organic vegetables and fruit and so forth really, really easily. We just don't even get tempted to use an insecticide, not an organic pesticide. It's a very, very slack way we farm. Next one. That's just zooming in a bit on Anna Marie's magnificent vegetable garden, which gives us our sort of weekly income. And
so, Graham, we're just starting to run out of time. Can you
okay. I'll just say that we have found growing organically very straightforward, incredibly rewarding, quite profitable, and I believe that we can educate lots and lots of people in how to do it. And every week there are more products on the market, which is making being an organic grower easier and easier. And with the farmers market in Adelaide, I mean, we're talking 7,000 customers tomorrow coming through in 4 hours. And if we can't make a living out of that, there's something wrong with us. So, well, tally ho.
Graham, I just want to say thank you so much. I just find what you're doing is so inspiring. And I think one of the things to show how you are so efficient with water use. Water use is one of the most important issues on the planet at the moment, a valuable resource. And you're showing the right way to do it rather than commodifying it and using water trading. The other one I think is so important to show how using high biodiversity, you can make a good family farm on just a few hectares. And maybe the rest of the world doesn't understand it, but for Australia, 20 hectares is nothing. It's really efficient. So thank you. And now I'd like to hand over to Carolyn. Carolyn's been waiting for so long. I can't see you. Where are you, Carolyn? Where is she? Scott, can you see Carolyn logged in? She's been in contact. Where True.
So while you're mucking around here on, we've actually got a whole lot of agricultural college graduates coming to the farmers market tomorrow, and that'll be very interesting. So there's a whole lot of graduates, university graduates with stalls, and we're being visited by a whole lot more. So it's a growing thing.
You know, for me, I think that is really important, Graham, in terms of what you're doing to get agricultural graduates. I did exactly the same on my farm. I can't tell you how many people even did their PhDs out of my farm. Always opened it up for research. It's just critical. So I don't know what's happened to Carolyn. She's texted me. She was here before. I can't see her. Scott, well, look, while we're waiting for Carolyn, we'll just open it up for questions, please. You might as well put Graham back. You can. Thanks. And Tim as well. We'll just get the three of us on board. And hopefully we'll find Carolyn soon. She was here. She did text me and somehow lost her. So I suppose why I wanted Graham here is to talk about the importance of actually agrobiodiversity in systems like permaculture. And for many of us, we're very much influenced by Bill Mollison. And for Bill, I suppose you could say is for many of us is, and David Holmgren are the founders of permaculture. And we go back to the 70s when these ideas came out. And our farms, my farm, if you want to walk around it, you'll see these influences. And one of the things I'd like to say is I like Bill because Bill was not politically correct.
He was very incorrect.
Incorrect. That's what I liked about him.
Vigorously incorrect.
Yeah. So are we as well, but still, that's what I liked. Why he thought outside of the box, and had such an influence, and still is having such an influence, even though he's passed away.
Yeah, and I mean this business of biodiversity and so forth is really. Oh, there she is.
So Carolyn, we'll hand over to you now. Sorry, we're having all the joys with our Australian internet system, so people around the world will realise that our national internet system that we spent billions on could be better. So, Carolyn, I'll get you to introduce yourself and then see if you can have some luck with the sharing the slides. Otherwise, I'll share them for you.
I was going to say, I feel a little bit nervous about one, my country internet, and two, the people before me that have struggled to share their screens. So I feel a little bit nervous about that. But I'm fully aware that we're over time. So
yeah,
I'm going to smash through.
Go for it. Sorry?
I'm just going to smash through my... Yeah, just Hannah.
Talk about what you're
I'm
doing
just going to see if I can screen.
Okay. Because what I'd like to say, why I wanted Carolyn here is that what she's doing to get young farmers into farming is just so important. She's also been really active in getting up PGS and many other initiatives in Australia. Okay, it looks like you're working. Oh, no, hang on. Yep, got it. Why?
Yay.
Hey, Carolyn, I'm very jealous.
You're the most successful out of any of us.
I get like the gold star for 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, and I get to screen share my screen. Okay, I'm going to smash through because I know that we're over time. So I'm going to try and do everything super, super quick. I just want to say that I feel like I'm in the room of the very, very wise elders, and I feel like I'm the young kid on the block. And yeah, we have lots of ambition. OreCo-op is being created out of, so just to take a step back, my name is Carolyn, and we run an organic farm ourselves. We run 100 acres in northeast Victoria. Super, super passionate about organic farming systems, super disillusioned with I guess, the financial system that I just don't think is suited to organic farm systems. So 3 to 4 years ago, I basically embarked on a ridiculous journey of trying to change the way that we see finance and investment with organic farmland. And so that's where OreCorp was born. And so OreCorp is basically an organic and regenerative farmers cooperative in Australia, and really just trying to change the way that we see our food systems. Super inspired by Tim. I think hearing Elena, I just totally take my hat off to, I guess, the pioneers that have been trying to do the really hard yards for organic farming and the organic industry for the last 30 years. And I feel like we need to take a deep breath and we need to say, okay, what does it look like and how do we grow that industry for the next 20 years? You know, I've got teenage children. My kids are super passionate about the environmental world, and I'm so glad that they understand how they have been part of our organic farm. But I just think, how do we get the next generation onto land? In my area, land has almost doubled in the last sort of 4 to 5 years. So our 100 acres, in a sense, has almost doubled in value. And so for people coming into the land, there is no opportunity for them to be able to get any sort of return from that type of land. So OreCorp essentially is trying to overcome that. And so I'm going to try and smash through these slides. We're looking at land investment. That's where we started. So OreCorp essentially started from trying to work out how we could get investment into land. As we've progressed, we've realized that the land alone is not the problem. The people are part of the problem, as in the farm side of it and the expertise that we need, and also the supply chain. And so we've actually developed a couple of different ways that we're trying to address that. These are the things, as I said just before, our first endeavour was to look at investment into farmland. Through our journey, we've realised that there are all these issues in the organic industry, and I think Tim and Helena and Graham touched on these things, is if we don't look at the supply chain and we don't look at natural capital resilience, we don't look at these other things, we actually miss the point of why farmers aren't making money, or why they may not, or why their children may not want to be able to take on the farm beyond their own legacy. So I feel like I'm talking to the converted tonight. I think there's a lot of people in the room that totally understand this slide. I think in Australia, we have an absolute emergency on our hands. You know, I heard today this incredible man from the UK speak, and he talked about how if we don't value our natural capital and stop talking about GDP and start talking about natural capital and social capital, we're actually done as a country. And I think that really solidified it for me. I think the natural capital value, the biodiversity emergency, even just the fact that in Australia we're seeing that we only have 50 harvests left, and my children are 20, and I think if we only have 50 harvests left, that's actually the end of their lives. They may not even have food in Australia to eat. And so for me, it's just an absolute urgency that we try and address this problem. And I think that organic farming does have the answers, but the problem with organic farming is we don't have the scale or the investment, and that's, I guess, what we're trying to address. I think on the upside, we're looking at organic and regenerative farming being absolutely part of the solution. When I talk to investment groups, they are deterred by organic farming because they think it's fringe, they think it's for hippies. They don't understand that it's actually the only type of farming that does not damage the earth and does not damage the food and does not damage the people. And so I guess what we're trying to do is to say to investment groups, there's absolutely a way that we can scale organic farming. What we need to do is get investment in across a multiple different areas. So from the land to the supply chain to natural capital, And across those different areas, we can all, the capital can actually facilitate massive change over a very short period of time.
Carolyn, I'm sorry, but we have to stop now. We've run out of time. It's now the next region. Apologise for the fact that we didn't give you enough time, because I really wanted to feature what you've got. So look, thank you so much. I want to thank all the speakers. Okay. And now we go over to Asia as the next area. So Carolyn, thank you so much, and I really appreciate what you're doing. Same with Tim, Graham, and Helena and Brendan. Thank you. It's time for Asia now.